Hi, everyone. Welcome to this edition of our Researcher Live webinar series, which is called The Importance and Integrity of Research in Regulatory Submissions, a Medical Writer's Perspective. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us live today. So the medical writer who is joining us today is Dr. Sadia Chaudhry-Zutshi. She is a medical writer, as I said, as well as the CEO of Triumphant Doctors. Welcome to this webinar today, Sadia.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. So before I officially hand it over to you, I have a few very quick housekeeping items. You've been on so many webinars before. I'm sure everybody knows this by now, but you're all on mute and your cameras are turned off, so you don't have to worry about anything of that. If you do have questions, the live chat is enabled, so I'll be monitoring that. If you, have any technical issues whatsoever, feel free to reach out. And then we have live Q&A enabled, and towards the end of the webinar, we'll be answering all of your questions. On Zoom below, there's one part where it says Q&A. If you click on there, you can add all of your questions as soon as they come up, but just know that we're not ignoring you. We're just saving the questions for the end. And then also we're recording this webinar. So if at any later point you want to rewatch any specific part, you can definitely do that. Share it with your colleagues. So you don't have to worry about that. About an hour after the webinar is over, I'll be sending out the recording to all of you. Okay. Now, a little bit about Research Solutions, which is the company behind this webinar today. So Research Solutions has been around since 2006 and provides solutions that simplify and streamline how organizations can discover, acquire, manage, and then also create scientific articles and data. Today, more than 70% of the top pharmaceutical companies, prestigious universities, and emerging businesses rely on our family of products. And by incorporating AI features into our products, we enable organizations to streamline and scale their research processes and innovative workflows. You'll learn a little bit more about some of the products that we have here today, actually. But without too much information from my side, Sadia, I'll just hand it right over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Julia. And thank you, everybody who's watching us live. And those of us on the East Coast, I know it's lunch hour. And those of you watching the recording, I hope this is useful and fruitful. So I want to quickly first kind of talk about the overview of regulatory submissions. There is this misconception in the world of medical writers and publishing that this is a very straightforward process. And we just kind of have an idea and we submit it to a health authority and that's it. It's all done. But there's a lot that goes into this. And I also wanted to point out some names. So regulatory health authorities include the FDA here in the United States. There's EMA in the EU. There's the MHRA in UK, Health Canada, as the name says, Canada. There's TGA, which is Australia, the NMPA China, PMDA Japan, and Anvisa Brazil. Now, this is just a handful of the big guys that, especially as a medical writer, it's good to be familiar with and to understand as we're working through these regulatory submissions. The process in itself requires careful planning and attention to detail to ensure that all of the necessary information is included in that submission package, which is all the documents all put together, which includes literature references, which is where something like Article Galaxy of Research Solutions really comes into play. It's important when we're submitting to these health authorities that we meet specific requirements and guidelines. Each of these above mentioned health authorities that I've spoken about has their own processes. There's a way in which you have to report to them, send them data, send them information, and kind of bundle it together. And that includes the background of the disease in which you are trying to treat or support, the drug or the device products, which includes its safety, efficacy, and manufacturing processes. It is the responsibility of every member of the submission team. Now, these teams include, because I'm going to be talking about these guys, we have regulatory affairs, pharmacovigilance, medical affairs, clinical development, CMC, non-clinical. All of these different individuals of these different teams come together to create a submission package. Now, within these, we have documents. We have specific documents with specific information. And within these documents is where we have references and how in which we are supporting what we are saying outside of just data itself. And the end goal of what we're trying to do is to be a part of the reproducibility of the research we have done. So, and that goes on to my next point, which is here on the components of the regulatory submission strategy. Now, this is a very important portion of what I'm going to be speaking about today and the whole purpose of this webinar is what happens at each step and where different types of research come into play and why it's so important to have that integrity, like to have that consistency in how we're approaching and researching what we're doing. So first and foremost is planning and preparation. So this is an important component that involves identifying regulatory requirements of the health authority that you're submitting to, which country you're going to, and then planning out the activities to ensure that you're meeting those requirements. Usually around this time is where I'm sure some of you are familiar with something of a submission content plan would become very helpful. Next up would be the data collection. So here is when you're actually trying to, whether this could be, animal data, human data, this could also be metadata. This could be an analysis of literature that already exists, background information. Okay, so I have this particular drug that I believe will work on this disease. What's out there? What is the end goal here? Like, am I a proof of concept? Am I creating a drug development program, etc.? Then you want to analyze and present that data, of course. So you've tested in the lab, you've tested in clinical trials. Now you're taking all of that together and you're making sure that what you have is filling in the gaps. So within the data collection portion, you would have specific objectives and endpoints that you're trying to meet, goals in which you're trying to obtain information, and then you're interpreting that to ensure that what you are presenting to the health authority is safe, is efficacious, and that information is reproducible, right? So once all of those things are happening, the chances of getting approved are pretty high, correct? Well, hopefully. And then, of course, you submit your entire package and all that information to the health authority with your fingers crossed. Thank you. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about regulatory research for the medical writer. Now, as a medical writer, we have a very interesting job. We have to kind of work with all those different departments that I mentioned earlier, and they're known as subject matter experts, cross-functional teams, to put this idea, these concepts to life. So what happens is, as we're working on these documents for the regulatory submission, if and when these SMEs provide the medical writer with a full reference, which includes the DOI, or the actual PDF, it saves a lot of time. To complete a document for publishing, which is the step right before it goes off to the health authority, the medical writer has to format and edit all the references and cross-check with what the publisher may or may not have. Now, sometimes the publishers that pharma companies work with can be in-house, sometimes they're external. There's different ways in which that information is being shared, maybe across various electronic document management systems, whether you're using Viva, whether you're using SharePoint, whether you're using a third party, or if it's something you're doing in-house. So there's multiple ways of doing it. And as the relationship between the subject matter experts and the medical writer improves, the process becomes more seamless. There's less lags when the submission documents go to the publisher. Because what happens is the medical writer picks up on, okay, all right, well, this is the same exact sentence, the same exact reference. I used an X, Y, and Z document in this place. So let me go access that and make sure it is represented in the same way. Also, sometimes, within references, the dates change. So all of those kinds of things, like as that relationship builds between the SME and the medical writer, this process becomes more natural and becomes easier. Also, when the medical writer has access to previously submitted literature and full references, we're able to replicate that information versus digging or purchasing the reference again. And effective reference gathering is very important for regulatory compliance and approval because the entire process is very complex. There's lots of scientific data. You have to be very accurate. It's important to manage your time and your resources. It can get very expensive if you're not keeping track of what you're saying when or how you're presenting it. Because for those of us who've done a submission before and we understand how it works on the other end, when you have a submission package, sometimes we're very redundant. We say the same thing a couple of times in various documents at different stages because when it goes to the health authorities, there's different people reviewing those documents, probably at different stages. So you want to make sure that point comes across. But what if in the event there's one person looking at it in different places and you have the reference mislabeled, or you said one thing here, but you're saying another thing there, and you're referencing the same exact what literature or whatever it may be. So that can become a little tricky, and you could get tripped up on that. You can get called out on that. And that's where tools such as Article Galaxy come into play, and they can really save your life. So that's a good one right there. So before I talk a little bit on what Article Galaxy is and how it actually supports what I'm saying, I want to talk a little bit about the types of regulatory research that are necessary for a health authority submission. So this is kind of important because at times when we hear research, especially in the field of biotech and pharma, everyone thinks like either a lab or they think someone like sitting in front of a computer or something like that, which I mean, those are very true things. But there's also an in-between. So literature research is a place to start when you have something that you're thinking of doing and you're trying to gain knowledge of what is already happening, right? You want to see like, okay, look, we have this idea, you know, we're looking at our what's in front of us in terms of scientific literature, and we're looking at previous research studies. Let's try to identify any gaps we have internally, you know, generate some hypotheses and determine the feasibility of what we're trying to do. You know, has someone done this before, etc. Next is safety and efficacy. This is important, especially since we're speaking of testing on, you know, living creatures, animals or humans, right? You want to make sure that what you're doing is not harmful and it's actually doing what you say it's going to do. So this could be, you can use the research in PDFs, you can use the research on something like clinicaltrials.gov, you can look at published papers, but it's still research, right? It's still a way in which you're digging through information that probably already exists out there in the ether of the internet. And then there's drug development research. Now this right here is very important as you're doing your proof of concept, as you're creating those clinical study protocols to ensure that you're actually putting down on paper and you're actually going to be working on real humans on the process and what it is you're trying to obtain. And this includes between the drug discovery, preclinical research, as well as the clinical trials. Hopefully that was very clear. If it wasn't, I can obviously clarify that. Thank you. Okay, now this is very wordy. So these are my words. So I'm going to try to summarize this as best as I can. Why is research so important? Why do we want to go through all of this? So number one, the most basic is so we don't have to reinvent the wheel, right? The last thing you want to do is to get to a point in which you have this idea, you have this thought process in which you're creating a drug development plan or whatever it may be, and you haven't taken the time to understand what already is out there. Obviously, nobody wants to be shackled by, okay, this already exists. We want creativity, you want innovation, you still want to think outside of the box. That's one thing. But sometimes your thought process would be going down a certain path that somebody else has already thought of. And maybe it worked for them and maybe it didn't. In both scenarios, it's pretty important for you to understand. Leveraging Article Galaxy to search those open access and even for purchase literature is an excellent way to learn about your market. Like market research is so important in like biotech. You might not want to be the first, and that's fine, but you probably want to be the best. Most people want to be the best. They want to show off. They want it to be like, this is why my product is better than yours, etc. Of course. And one of the biggest conversations that does occur in-house cross-functionally is how we want to present what we, the company, is trying to say to health authorities, but also the public. This includes the patient communities. So as you're creating these development programs for your clinical trials, you want to make sure that the clinical trial is feasible for your patient population and also their caregivers. there might already be information out there that can help prevent foreseeable errors, right? Like that's the word, right? You want feasibility and you want to avoid foreseeable errors. So as you're performing market research, it's beneficial to the company, and it also assists medical writers to understand how to position and present information within their regulatory submission documents. Each portion, I'm going to take the ECTD as an example because that's what most people are most familiar with. Each of those documents has a very particular reason, right? There's a reason why that exists. There's guidelines for each of those documents, and there's obviously room for innovation and creativity always, but there's a reason why it is the way that it is. Because when you are trying to take what's here in your office, in your team, and all of those brains, and then you're putting it onto a document, and then you're putting it out there for the public, you want to make sure that there is a stream of communication. And your research is going to help you with that, because even if someone has already done it before or someone has not, that's an advantage. And you should definitely take your time to think about it. And the next story I'm going to give is a personal one, because sometimes, especially in the worlds of medical writing, we have to hit the ground running. We kind of come in, we're given a task, and we're like, okay, this is the day of the submission, this is what we have to do. And there's no time for you to actually learn or like immerse yourself into the entire development program or anything like that. You just have to go and you have to work. And what I have done, and it has served me well, is use the literature references that are being used multiple times in the documents to understand what it is that you are presenting outward. When you sometimes that working a little bit backwards helps you move forward. And it also helps you avoid, I'm going to say it again, but foreseeable errors. And it's very important when we're writing in these documents and as we're building them up for us to present that information in a consistent, standardized mannerism. So there's a thought process behind it. So in the years that I've been doing this, it's helped. It's helped because even if the document in itself might not be perfect, at least I understand what I'm doing, right? Because I think that's just as important. And sometimes if you understand what you're doing and if that shows, then that's enough for there to be a positive outcome for yourself as well as the document itself. And then when it goes to the publisher, like I said, like there is this misconception that it is a straightforward process, but even when the document gets to the publisher, you have to ensure that they have all the PDFs to all the literature references within that submission. And that could be a lot of documents. So it's important to have this level of sanity and to have a process in place so that you can go back and find what you need. And another thing that's very important as medical writers is sometimes that background information, which is actually just a meta-analysis of research that already exists, of that clinical study protocol, for instance, that's the example I have here, is the foundation of the clinical trial. It is what you are letting the health authority know. Be like, hey, this is the reason why I believe that this is something worthwhile. This is the reason why this is studied, this clinical trial, this drug product, this device is safe, efficacious, and helpful in this patient population. And I'm not going to say, I'll say it for the 100th time, but through research on what already exists in the market avoids errors that are foreseeable. Thank you. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about Article Galaxy. So, you see the picture on the right, it literally just looks like someone checking their email. And it's very interesting because it is kind of like that. Just the same way in which you could organize your emails into folders and subfolders and kind of move things around, you could do that. And one thing that I find very helpful and very useful is if within wherever you're working, there are multiple drug products, what you can do is create folders for each of those drug products. And then you could even create subfolders within those that you can have the submission, you can have the document name, and kind of help store things in one place. And the best thing about it is that you could share it across those on your team cross-functionally. because you can sign on, do single sign on. So you just kind of log in with your company login. And as I save information into a folder, someone else who signs in after me can access that information. So it helps for that consistency and making sure that if I've already purchased something or if I already saved something, someone who comes in after me doesn't have to do the same thing again, right? And then if the other thing that's very useful of one of the Article Galaxy tools is the add-on of the Word add-on. I apologize, my words. The Word add-on, it works very similar to EndNote, in which that storage library that you have, as you're typing, you can kind of add in from that saving. And then as you have cross-functional team members working on a document, they can access it. I know that was a lot of words, so I'm going to kind of go through the slides, just the slide just a little bit. So tools for discovering, accessing, and managing the scientific literature. Now, these are PDFs, right? Everybody's very familiar with when you go onto open access, you go onto PubMed, you can find articles, right? It's very important to have one area in which all of this is actually stored in, because then you could have one SME working on PubMed, one person working in a different journal environment, one person working in a different journal environment, and they might be purchasing these journals. And they might actually be saving them onto their desktop. They might be emailing it to themselves, and they might not be sharing it with you, but they're using that, and then they're using that information to put into your documents. And then when at the end, you know, when the medical writer is formatting, editing, and making sure all the references are there, you're like, wait, this reference is missing, and maybe there's not enough time to go back to that person, and you go and you purchase it again. So with the use of Article Galaxy, you can avoid that. And that's really helpful because it has that PubMed integration. There are for purchase literatures. They kind of go to all the different journals and they bring it into one place. And they say they'll take a couple of days, and I don't want to like say anything, but they're usually pretty fast. My favorite story to tell, and this is very important, is for one submission document, we had a textbook, like an actual textbook that was referenced, and we were trying to figure out, should we scan this? And then we couldn't find it. Something happened. And I reached out, you know, I went on my Article Galaxy, I looked for it, I requested it. And first they were like, this is gonna be very difficult, I don't know. And I was like, okay, that's fine. You know what? We found a way around it. But within a day or two, somebody on Article Galaxy end found it. And it was amazing. And they are like, do you need the specific chapters? Do you want specific pages, or do you want the whole book? Like, it was wonderful. So that browser extension and all of that stuff, it's totally worth it because it gives you that sanity and that peace of mind, especially as a medical writer, for those who can relate, when you're like at that 11th hour and it has to go to the publisher and it's all on you right now. And all the SMEs are scattered everywhere doing their own thing. And the most beautiful thing is the reuse insight. So sometimes, like I was saying, like there's a lot of information that gets rinsed and repeated around the documents, especially if it's like the background information of the disease, or like the competitor insights or whatever it may be. It helps you understand where you would need to go to if you needed more information. So let's just say there's this one particular reference that you're like, wow, we've really used this in a lot of different places. And then you're like, okay, we're reusing this a lot. And you're like, I need to learn more. I need to understand more. You can open up that PDF and it's easier for you to actually go back to it because of the statistics and like the analysis that you can have with Article Galaxy. And yeah, okay. And of course the 24/7 help support, which is fantastic. So thank you for that. All right, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the challenges in regulatory research. So obviously, this is an important point because nothing is perfect, right? There's a certain level of understanding that goes into this entire process, that you want to do the best that you possibly can with what you're given, but it won't necessarily equate to perfection. It's just going to equate to something as close as possible. So there might be data quality issues, limited resources, navigating complex regulations. Now, in terms of what each of these means, and the reason why they're so important here is because when you do that initial market research, or when you do that literature research or that drug development research early on before you begin the planning portion of the clinical trial, it will help you understand where weaknesses may already exist in the market for this particular drug product or even disease process, and like, or whatever there may be. For data quality issues, it's important for you to, work with your data management, your biostatistician, and have a process in-house in which the data that either you're getting live on humans or animals, or even your literature, whatever it may be, that it's validated, right? That's important. And it's important, whatever you are leveraging, that you trust on the other end, right? You don't just want to take something for face value, which is why it's important to know enough before you move forward. Limited resource is a huge challenge in the regulatory space, because as in the regulatory team, everybody is devoted to that submission, and that's their bread and butter. But those cross-functional teams that I mentioned earlier, they have their own studies and their own activities that are happening. And then when it comes to when everybody needs to come together for that regulatory submission, it's important to have everyone's buy-in. And for my medical writers, you know how complicated that can be. And then the regulations. So what happens is sometimes what works for one health authority might not work in another. This is especially challenging for those who work in the clinical development space, because they have to ensure that the way in which they present their data or the testing that they do is compliant. And then it's the regulatory team's responsibility to ensure that we are staying up to date with the regulations. That time is being invested in actually curating robust submission plan. Like, it's very important. So that's just a little bit about that. Now, my favorite topic, medical writing, regulatory submission, coming together with AI. Now, AI is the present, it's the future. It's in the worlds in which we live in, it's very important for you to be on board. It's possible, but if you aren't comfortable utilizing AI, you're going to be about 6-7 steps behind now. I'm a Copilot person. I mean, Copilot is a part of ChatGPT, like whatever it may be you're using in for yourselves. Even Adobe now has that AI feature. I definitely use it when I have a thick PDF in front of me. I click on it. I'm like, give me the summary. You need to get on board with this in order to ensure that you're being as successful as you possibly can, of course. Now, regulatory submission strategy involves, I've already talked about this, right? You're planning for the data collection, your analysis, your presentation, your submission of the data, of course. This strategy isn't to ensure that as you go to these different health authorities, you're getting approvals. So leveraging AI will help you expedite the process and possibly avoid redundancies in your submission. So let's talk a little bit about that. So what are the benefits? So there's 2 basic benefits, efficiency and accuracy. Obviously, it's very interesting because with artificial intelligence, you build up with it, right? Like the more you use it, the more it learns. It's a back and forth. Nowadays, there's all these software companies that are creating, they're like, it can learn for you. So you don't have to do this. So you don't have to like do the first conversation with a client or a customer, and it'll have that conversation and it'll learn what you like and what you don't like. It's a little scary, but it is what it is. Now, efficiency is a pretty big thing, because when we're talking, especially as a medical writer, right? If you're talking about what we call TLFs, which are tables, listings, and figures, when all of that data comes in from like an active ongoing clinical trial, now whether it's non-clinical or clinical, it could be overwhelming. There's like hundreds of just stuff. And then you kind of have to find a way to kind of sift through it, go through it, understand it, and make sure you're in the right thought process. Artificial intelligence is working its way into taking that information and summarizing it. And that's kind of cool, because it saves a lot of man hours and potentially avoid human errors, right? I mean, that's important. So the data extraction, cleaning, formatting does save medical writers a lot of time, especially when you're talking clinical study reports, if you know what that is. If not, that's okay. Now, in terms of accuracy, This is by preventing errors and reducing the needs for revision. So if you're looking at table X and you're going through it and you're like, okay, yeah, that was like a 0.07, but then it was actually like 0.08 or like whatever it may be, just like someone to like do a quality check of what you're doing. Those are the kinds of things that the accuracy can be improved through leveraging AI appropriately. So in summation, this allows for consistent reproducibility of the content being presented, which at the end of the day is the goal, right? At the end of the day, you want your research to be what people are researching when they start their process. So that's a little bit on that. So now I do want to take a minute to talk about how you can use AI in your research, but you also want to conduct with your research with integrity. So a few things that are very important are rigorous methodology. So when you're leveraging AI, especially, and you're starting with this new process, you want to make sure that you have some kind of SOP in place, maybe a work instruction, outside of, the validity of what you're using, of course. You want to have guidelines. You want to make sure that you're going towards using AI after you have done some of your homework. So if I were to, it's like when you're in school and you use Spark Notes, for those of you who are familiar, versus reading the book. Maybe you want to read the book before you do Spark Notes, or watching the movie instead of reading the book. There's different ways of doing it, absolutely, but just relying solely on AI, I mean, that's not ethical, right? That wouldn't be ethical, because then AI could just do your job. You have to put some minds and some thought into it just to kind of make sure that the information that you're requesting out of it, you can validate it. And you can be like, okay, yeah, I stand by this, versus like using AI and just presenting it to someone. And then data integrity, of course, accuracy, completeness, and consistency, very important as you're using AI for regulatory research, very, very important. My favorite is real-time collaboration. Now, a lot of us already use SharePoint, some people refer it as Microsoft Teams, it's the same thing. You use OneDrive, you might be using an ADMS system, like I mentioned, there's Viva now, there's collaborative authoring, there's so many different ways to get people together within a document to understand what's going on. So when you're leveraging something, I'm going to go back to Research Solutions. Now, Research Solutions has like a family of products, in which one of them is their AI component. I forget the name, Julia, but you can talk on it later. And ours is an S. But if you're using that, hopefully then everybody within your team is using the same, right? So as you're working on teaching the AI bot or whomever, it's like a person, I guess now, you're teaching it, right? So everybody within your company is also using it. So it's kind of cool, because it's like it's going back and forth. There's also, there's please review. There's so many things that are components of artificial intelligence, and they allow for people to come together within a team and to take all of their thought process into one place. And it allows for better communication, because that's very important. That's the bottom line. All right, obviously challenges, everyone's always a little scared, a little bit skeptical of AI, which is fair, However, let's talk about data privacy and security. Now, there's a lot of softwares now that are under development and currently in development or already out there. There's, especially for medical writers, and everyone's always coming up with a tool. Before you sign on for something, you want to ensure that that company or that product has taken the time to understand the product and your safety. It actually needs to come up in conversation, because sometimes people are like, okay, this is a given, it's provided, I ensure that your data is protected and it's secure. Make sure they're using the words. That's very important, whoever your vendor may be. Validation requirements. It's important for the internal QA department to have a say in how you're implementing. and what the validation package looks like and all of those documents, you know, making sure like health authorities have very strict guidelines. Some of them might have guidelines for if you're using an AI system to analyze your data, for instance, or store your data. So it's important to ensure that you're keeping up to date with the various guidelines to ensure that you are validated. It is important. And then there's ethical considerations. Now, I've talked on this just a little bit previously, right? You can't just let the AI do your job for you. You have to kind of take a step back and like have some knowledge of it first. But of course, everybody has their ways around it, right? There's sometimes people will go to AI first. I mean, don't get me wrong, I do it too. Like I'll go there first, but if you're using it in a way in which you're trying to get that information up front so that you can work backwards, that's okay. But that's for you to consider in your own house, and that's very important. All right, so I've been speaking a lot. I just want to sum up a little bit here now in terms of the whole point of this webinar and me going on and talking at you, as it would seem, is research, whether you're doing it for whatever purpose in the process, in your regulatory submission, it really helps streamline medical writing. Medical writing as a field, it's very complex and it can be very convoluted and it's greatly misunderstood. But it is the responsibility of the medical writer to ensure that all these different thought processes, all the different individuals, all the different stakeholders, their voice is heard. Because at the end of the day, when that document is closed and it's handed off, that chapter gets closed. Not saying that health authorities, you know, you have the ability to, you know, make edits and amendments, of course. But it's important to get everybody's buy-in in the beginning because we all have feelings, right? At the end of the day, we're all human beings. Leveraging AI in medical writing is very helpful in time management and resource management. If you're using systems such as Article Galaxy and you're using them correctly, it really helps streamline the process between the SME, the medical writer, and publishing. Very important. Informed decision making, you know, like it's important to understand when you are out there, you're shopping for a vendor, for instance, or you're trying to be like, okay, you know what, everyone keeps talking about AI, what is this? Or how do I incorporate this? Or how is it that Article Galaxy is able to do this, you know? Ask the questions, get on a call with the vendor. Our counterparts that I've had experience with at Research Solutions are fantastic. Julia's fantastic. You know, if you have a question, ask. And then, of course, I spoke about regulatory research, submission strategy. I'm not going to go again unless anyone has questions. And then last but not least, reproducibility. We're all scientists here. We all entered in this field as, you know, those we have a hypothesis, then we do testing, and then we kind of ensure that what we've done, somebody else can do. So having that consistency and streamlining those work processes, it's very important. And that's, thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sadia. That's incredible. I learned a lot today, actually. So I see we have a few questions already. Just one quick item before we dive into the Q&A, which is always my favorite part of these webinars. So Sadia, thank you so much also for talking about Article Galaxy. If anybody here on the call, you don't know exactly what Article Galaxy is, we might have a few customers on this call as well. You can head over here, researchersolutions.com/sales. Feel free to reach out, ask for a free trial, or if you want to jump on a call and see if it might be helpful for your use case. I'm also adding a link in the chat just to make it easier for everyone. So feel free to head over there to learn a bit more about Article Galaxy. And on the AI, actually, yes, Site Assistant. I think that's the name, Sadia, you were probably looking for.
Thank you.
We call it, it's the ChatGPT for researchers because it's backed by real research. You might have seen like a few of the examples on, you know, LinkedIn or X, Twitter, where you see it, where people ask ChatGPT something and then you get like an author name, and that author, either it doesn't, like he or she doesn't exist, or like the book name doesn't exist. So sometimes those hallucinations might happen, not all the time, but that's kind of part of what makes Site Assistant different. And I'm adding a link here. You have 2 free searches, so you can just play around it with it if you want to later on or in your lunch break. Okay, so let's dive into the questions here. Okay, the first one is, in clinical trials, what are the trends or methods to ensure data integrity, particularly in the context of remote monitoring and wearable devices, to maintain consistency, reliability, and accuracy across all stages of data collection, storage, and analysis? That was a lot, but let me know.
That was a lot. And that's a great question, because I think that's something that I worked at Biotel Research. That's one of the positions that I had a few years ago, and they were in the process of launching one of those wearable devices. And I know that now, to answer the question in itself, I think that's where SOPs and work instructions come into place. No, I mean, I don't know. That would be a bit beyond my scope. I think the most important thing probably would be to ensure consistency and standardization of how you're collecting the data. And then when you actually have the data, you probably want to make sure that there's a way in which there's a system that you're following when you're analyzing. So that would probably be a question for someone who's actually in the clinical development space. But that's a very good question. I think data integrity for wearable devices, especially as we're working towards creating an environment of decentralized clinical trials, because a lot of patients aren't able to travel or to get to their clinical sites. No, that's a great question. Thank you. But I don't have like an answer, but that's a good question. That's a very good question. Thank you.
Yeah, great question. Thank you so much. Are there any limitations or official guidelines for using AI in regulatory submissions in any jurisdiction that you know of? Sorry, trapped over that word.
I don't know if there's anything official. I can't speak on like the official. However, I do know that it is something that company by company is a discussion, because since Copilot is becoming, well, that's not the right word. Since Copilot is being pushed by Microsoft, for instance, and a lot of companies do use the Office 365 environment, it's pretty accessible. So I'm sure that I can't think of anything right on top of my head, but especially like, I think tying into the medical device question, I'm pretty sure there might be, yeah, but I'll look into it. Thank you for asking. I'll look into it.
Yeah, and that's actually a perfect segue. Before we answer the other questions, Sadia, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Oh, sure. Should I type in my email?
Yeah,
You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on LinkedIn also. I have a very unique name, at least I think so. You can find me on LinkedIn.
I'll make sure that the email with the recording has a full name so everybody can find you on LinkedIn.
Perfect. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Awesome. The next question is, what is your experience with Perplexity AI? Have you used it?
Oh, no, I haven't. I have not. I would be interested to know what that is. What is that?
I think it's also like an AI, like a ChatGPT version. I haven't used it. I've heard a lot about it, but I haven't made any like personal, I haven't tried it myself.
Yeah, no, I'm a Copilot person. I use Copilot because I love the Office 365 environment, but I'm not familiar with it, but I'm sure it's cool. I'm sure it's great. They all are.
Yeah. Okay, the next question is, what's your personal take on AI?
My personal take on AI is that it's a present and it's a future. And I do believe that it's worthwhile for everybody in our industry to educate themselves on. There's a lot of free resources at the moment just because it's booming and it's something that everybody's like working towards and understanding. So I think it's worth, especially if you're running a company, or like if you're working in-house somewhere, it's important for someone to take the lead, whether it's department by department or whether it's someone for the entire company, depending on the size. Somebody should definitely start investing time in it, because it's not just the regulatory department, obviously, right? I'm a little biased towards regulatory just because of my background, but I mean, there's also accounting. There's AI for accounting. There's AI for the clinical side, like the clinical trial question we had earlier. So in terms of how are you analyzing the data? you know, like it's here, and it's here to stay. So I think everybody should learn it.
Thank you so much for sharing that. The last question I see is, when implementing Article Galaxy, roughly how long did that take you?
So I wasn't the main point of contact at my first my first initial encounter. I was just one of the end users. However, once I did have questions, it was very simple. So they're very wonderful at Research Solutions at providing ad hoc training as needed, and just getting in touch with your account partner, whomever that may be, and having demos set up, because you're always going to have new members that join. So sometimes they need a refresher or training, and quite frankly, even those who were at the initial training sometimes forget. So just we recorded the training, and then we kind of leveraged that, and then we had one point of contact internally. That was at one of the companies I was at, and then at my second company, I had direct access to our account manager, and that was very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, I agree. We have a wonderful customer support and customer success team. So kudos to those teams.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Okay, let's give people just another second here to see if we have any other questions. Okay, when you use Copilot, how much do you rely on it being accurate versus double check?
Okay, so it depends on what I'm asking it for. So let's just say I'm working on, if you're familiar, like on an ECT document, like module 272, right? That's like on biopharmaceutical and the analysis of, that's not my forte. So I'll probably rely a little bit more on that and leverage like the FDA guideline on what goes into that document versus like for my company, I have to create like an SOP or some kind of like, okay, create me like an agreement document or like a photo release document. Then I'll just say, okay, yeah, whatever. And I'll just do like a little tweaking here and there. So I think it kind of depends for myself on the level of importance. So if it's something that I'm like, okay, this is going to be external facing, like for instance, for my slides, I leverage Copilot to get those pictures. I mean, I didn't have to like go on Google. Like I remember back in high school, we used to go on Google and copy and save the image and then put it in your slide. So instead I used Copilot. I kind of gave it the prompts and I was like, okay, this is perfect. And then I took that information and then I made it my own. So it just depends. It depends. Sometimes if I need to ask it a question, like a simple question of, tell me everything I need to know about Article Galaxy. It'll like pull everything from the website and it'll just pile it up for me. And I know enough about Article Galaxy that I can rely on it, or I can send that forward. If I've written a paragraph and I'll ask it to rewrite it for me, I'm like, I'll use my grammar check, of course, but I do look at it for condensation, absolutely. So long-winded answer. Please.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Like, just as a marketer, I feel like sometimes it's easier if you have like AI write something for you and then you add your touch to it. Just like the first draft is like already, it's easier to rewrite versus to start from scratch. So yeah.
No. Yeah, that's a very good point. And remember, it's learning. So especially if you're like logged in already to your account, it's gonna remember the prompts that you're asking or the way in which you speak or what. So it's gonna get more and more intelligent. So it's a whole fascinating thing. The more you use it, the better it becomes. It's like your Amazon.com.
100%. Amazing. Well, I appreciate all these questions and Sadia, you answering all of them. If any questions come up, afterwards, or maybe I don't know, maybe I skipped a question, which I hope not. Definitely feel free to reach out. I'll add the contact information in the email address here. Also, if it's a question for us, I'm leaving the contact information here. Of course, always feel free to head over to the website. Then with that being said, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us live today. Thank you so much, Sadia, for sharing all of your expertise. This was wonderful. Yeah, really glad that you were able to make it here, and I guess see you on the next one.
Absolutely. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I really appreciate it. Everyone have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Take care.